In the cold vastness of space, a single warship drifted silently among the stars. It was old, battered, and barely holding together, but it carried something far more important than its rusting hull or flickering lights. It carried hope. This ship was the USS Vanguard, one of the last remnants of humanity's once proud interstellar fleet. Its captain, Ethan Hayes, stood on the bridge, staring out at the endless void through the cracked viewport. His face was lined with stress, his short brown hair streaked with gray. He had seen too much death, too much loss, but he refused to give up. The galaxy wasn't what it used to be. Once, humans had explored new worlds, built thriving colonies, and forged alliances with alien species. But that golden age was long gone, crushed under the iron fist of the Galvorian Empire. The Galvorians were ruthless conquerors who swept across the stars like a plague, destroying anyone who dared oppose them. They called themselves liberators, bringing order to chaos, but everyone knew the truth. They were tyrants, enslaving entire civilizations to feed their insatiable hunger for power. Earth had been the first to fall. The planet that birthed humanity became nothing more than a trophy for the Empire, its people scattered or enslaved. Only a handful of human ships managed to escape, fleeing into the outer reaches of the galaxy, where they waged a desperate guerrilla war against their oppressors. Over time, those ships dwindled until only one remained, the Vanguard. And even it was a shadow of its former self, patched together with salvaged parts and running on sheer determination. Ethan leaned forward slightly, resting his hands on the railing in front of him. Behind him, the rest of the crew worked tirelessly. At their stations, Lieutenant Olivia Carter, the tactical officer, sat at her console, monitoring sensor readings. She was young, barely in her mid-20s, but she had already proven herself to be one of the sharpest minds aboard the ship. Her blonde hair was tied back in a tight ponytail, and her blue eyes darted across the screen as she analyzed data streams. Beside her, Chief Engineer Daniel Brooks muttered under his breath while tinkering with a malfunctioning panel. Daniel was older than most of the crew, pushing 50, with greasy overalls and a perpetual scowl. Yet despite his gruff exterior, he was the heart of the ship, always finding ways to keep the ancient vessel running when logic said it. SHOULDN, single quotes T. Dr. Lavra Bennett moved quietly between the crew members, offering words of encouragement or checking on their well-being. As the ship's medic, she had seen the toll this endless fight was taking on everyone. Many of the crew suffered from injuries, exhaustion, and the crushing weight of knowing they might never see home again. Lavra tried to remind them that they weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for something greater, for freedom, for the future. But sometimes, even she struggled to believe her own words. For now, though, there was no time for reflection. The Vanguard had received an encrypted transmission earlier that day, a message intercepted from the Galvorian command network. At first glance, it seemed like another routine update, but buried deep within the code was something chilling. The Empire was preparing to unleash a weapon known as the Aegis Array. According to the intel, this device was capable of wiping out entire planets with a single blast. Its target? Earth. Ethan clenched his fists as the reality sank in. If the Galvorians succeeded, it would mean the end of humanity, not just as a civilization, but as a species. There would be no survivors, no second chances. Everything they had fought for would be erased in an instant. He turned away from the viewport and addressed the crew. "We have a decision to make," he said, his voice steady but heavy with urgency. "We can run, try to hide somewhere the Empire won't find us. Or we can take the fight to them." A tense silence filled the room. No one spoke, but the expressions on their faces said enough. Running was tempting after all. What could one broken down ship do against an empire? But deep down, they all knew the truth. Hiding wouldn't save them. The Galvorians would hunt them down eventually, and when they did, They wouldn't show mercy. Olivia broke the silence first. If we're going to do this, we need a plan. We can't just charge into enemy territory and hope for the best. She's right, Daniel chimed in, wiping grease-stained hands on his overalls. This tin can won't last 5 minutes against their fleet unless we come up with something clever. Ethan nodded. Then let's get to work. We don't have much time. Over the next few hours, the crew gathered in the cramped briefing room to hash out a strategy. Maps of the Empire's core systems were projected onto the wall, highlighting key locations and potential weak points. Olivia suggested using decoys to distract the enemy patrols, allowing the vanguard to slip past unnoticed. Daniel proposed retrofitting some of the scavenged parts they'd collected during their raids to boost the ship's weapons and shields. Even Larva contributed ideas, suggesting ways to conserve resources and keep the crew focused during the mission. As the discussion continued, Ethan couldn't help but feel a glimmer of pride. These people, his people, were willing to risk everything for a cause that seemed impossible. They were tired, scared, and outnumbered, but they hadn't given up. Not yet. By the time the meeting ended, a rough plan had been formed. It was risky, almost suicidal, but it was their only shot. The vanguard would infiltrate the Empire's central command hub, located on Arcturus Prime, the capital world. From there, they would disable the Aegis array before it could be activated. If they succeeded, they would deal a devastating blow to the Empire's infrastructure, potentially sparking rebellions across the galaxy. If they failed, well, none of them wanted to think about that. That night, Ethan found himself unable to sleep. He wandered the dimly lit corridors of the ship, listening to the hum of its engines and the distant clatter of tools as Daniel worked late into the night. Eventually, he made his way to the observation deck, a small room with a large window overlooking the stars. Larva was already there, sitting cross-legged on the floor with a cup of coffee in her hands. Can't sleep either? She asked without looking up. Ethan shook his head and joined her. Too much on my mind. Larva smiled faintly. You know, you don't have to carry all of this alone. We're here with you, every step of the way. I know, Ethan replied softly, but what if I'm wrong? What if this is just a fool's errand? It doesn't matter, Larva said firmly. What matters is that we're trying, that we're still standing after everything they've thrown at us. Maybe we'll lose, maybe we'll die, but at least we'll go down fighting. Isn't that what being human is all about? Her words struck a chord deep within him. Ethan realized then that this wasn't just about winning or losing. It was about refusing to surrender, no matter how bleak things looked. It was about proving that even in the darkest times, hope could shine through. As he gazed out at the stars, Ethan felt a renewed sense of purpose. Tomorrow they would begin their journey toward Arcturus Prime. It would be dangerous, difficult, and likely fatal. But for the first time in a long time, Ethan believed they might actually have a chance. And maybe, just maybe, they could change the course of history. The USS Vanguard moved cautiously through the vast emptiness of space, its engines humming softly as it navigated the treacherous path toward enemy territory. The crew worked tirelessly, each person focused on their task. Everyone knew the stakes. They were heading into the heart of the Galvorian Empire, a place where even the smallest mistake could mean death. For now, though, there was no turning back. Ethan stood on the bridge, his eyes fixed on the navigation screen. The route they had chosen was risky, but necessary. To avoid detection, they would have to pass through several heavily patrolled sectors, controlled by the Empire's forces. Any slip-up, any stray signal or misstep could alert the Galvorians to their presence. Ethan trusted Olivia and Daniel to keep the ship running smoothly, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was bound to go wrong. As the hours passed, the tension aboard the ship grew thicker. Conversations were kept to a minimum, and The usual banter between crew members disappeared entirely. Lavra walked among them, offering quiet words of reassurance whenever she saw someone struggling. She noticed how worn out everyone looked, the dark circles under their eyes, the slumped shoulders, the nervous fidgeting. This mission wasn't just physically demanding. It was taking a toll on their minds too. It wasn't long before the first real challenge appeared. The sensors picked up a small fleet of Galvorian patrol ships ahead, blocking their path. Ethan immediately called for an emergency meeting in the briefing room. When the crew gathered, Olivia explained the situation. "There's no way around them," she said, pointing to the map on the wall. "If we try to skirt past, they'll spot us for sure. We need another option." Daniel scratched his head thoughtfully. "What about cloaking? Can we rig something up?" Olivia shook her head. "Even if we could, it wouldn't last long enough. These patrols are scanning constantly. They'd find us eventually." Ethan leaned back against the table, deep in thought. Then he remembered something, one of the scavenged parts they'd picked up during their last raid. It was a damaged communications array from a destroyed Galvorian vessel. At the time, they hadn't known what to do with it, but now it might be their only chance. "Can we use that old comm array?" Ethan asked, looking at Daniel. "Make it look like we're part of their fleet?" Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Maybe, but it'll take some work. And even then, there's no guarantee it'll fool them." "We don't have a choice," Ethan replied firmly. "Get started." For the next several hours, Daniel and a team of engineers worked frantically to modify the comm array. Meanwhile, Olivia programmed the ship's transponders to mimic the signals used by Galvorian vessels. The rest of the crew prepared for the worst, arming themselves and double-checking every system on the ship. If the ruse failed, they would need to be ready for a fight. Finally, everything was in place. As the Vanguard approached the patrol ships, Ethan gave the order to activate the fake signal. The crew held their breath, waiting to see if it would work. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the patrol ships moved aside, allowing the Vanguard to pass through unchallenged. A wave of relief swept over the crew, but Ethan didn't let himself relax. He knew this was only the beginning. There would be more obstacles ahead, and not all of them would be so easily overcome. Their journey continued, and soon they encountered remnants of other rebel groups, broken ships manned by desperate survivors. One such group hailed them, begging for help. Their leader, Rachel Morgan, introduced herself as the commander of a small squadron of fighters. Her voice crackled over the comms, filled with urgency. "We've been trying to hit supply lines near Arcturus Prime," Rachel explained. "But we're outnumbered and outgunned. If you're heading that way, maybe we can join forces." Ethan hesitated. Bringing strangers aboard was risky, especially when trust was in short supply. But he also knew they could use the extra firepower. After consulting with Olivia and Daniel, he agreed to let Rachel's squadron dock with the Vanguard. Rachel turned out to be exactly as she sounded over the comms brash, confident and fiercely determined. She was in her early 30s, with fiery red hair tied back in a ponytail and sharp green eyes that seemed to miss nothing. She quickly made herself at home on the ship, chatting with the crew and inspecting their equipment. While her skills as a pilot were undeniable, her bold personality clashed almost immediately with Ethan's cautious leadership style. "You're playing it too safe," Rachel said one day during a strategy session. "If we want to take down the Aegis array, we need to hit hard and fast, no hesitation. And if we rush in without thinking, we'll get ourselves killed." Ethan shot back. "This isn't about glory, it's about survival." Rachel crossed her arms, clearly frustrated. "Survival? Is that really all you care about? Because I'm here to win. To make those bastards pay for what they've done." Her words struck a nerve with some of the crew, particularly the younger ones who were eager to prove themselves. Ethan saw the divide forming and realized he needed to address it before it caused problems. Later that evening, he pulled Rachel aside for a private conversation. "I get it," he said calmly. "You've lost people. We all have. But charging and recklessly won't bring them back. It'll just get more of us killed." Rachel sighed, her expression softening slightly. "I know you're right. It's just hard to sit back and wait when you feel like you should be doing more." "I understand," Ethan replied. "Believe me, I do. But sometimes patience is the hardest part of fighting. Trust me, we'll get our chance." Despite their differences, Rachel proved to be a valuable addition to the team. Her squadron provided much-needed support during a close call with another patrol fleet. Thanks to her quick thinking and expert flying, they managed to evade capture. Once again, slowly but surely, the crew began to warm up to her, seeing her not just as an outsider, but as someone willing to fight for the same cause. As the days dragged on, the reality of their mission weighed heavier on everyone. Supplies were running low, and the strain of constant vigilance was starting to show. Tempers flared more often, and arguments broke out over minor issues. Even Daniel, usually unflappable, snapped at a junior engineer during a routine check. Lavra did her best to mediate, reminding everyone that they were stronger together than apart. One night, after yet another tense standoff with a Galvorian scout ship, Ethan found himself alone on the observation deck. He stared out at the endless expanse of stars, wondering if they were truly making progress or simply delaying the inevitable. Lavra joined him after a while, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. "You look like you could use this," she said. Handing him one of the cups, Ethan accepted it gratefully, taking a sip before speaking. "Do you think we're doing the right thing? Dragging everyone into this mess?" Lavra sat down beside him, gazing out at the stars. "I think we're doing the best we can with what we have. None of us asked for this war, but here we are. All we can do is keep moving forward." Ethan nodded slowly, feeling a bit of the weight lift off his shoulders. He glanced at Laura, realizing how much he relied on her steady presence. "Thanks," he said quietly. "I needed to hear that." The next morning brought both good news and bad. On the positive side, they successfully bypassed another checkpoint thanks to Olivia's clever rerouting of their course. However, the bad news came shortly afterward when Daniel reported that the ship's fuel reserves were dangerously low. Without a way to replenish them, they wouldn't make it to Arcturus Prime. "We'll have to scavenge," Ethan decided. "Find a derelict ship or outpost and siphon whatever we can." It was a risky move, but they had no other options. Using Rachel's knowledge of nearby sectors, they located an abandoned mining station floating silently in the void. The place was eerie, its corridors dark and silent, except for the occasional groan of metal shifting in the vacuum of space. Teams were sent out to gather fuel and supplies while others stood guard, weapons at the ready, just as they finished loading the last containers onto the Vanguard. Alarms blared throughout the station. A Galvorian cruiser had arrived, drawn by the activity. Panic set in as the crew scrambled to return to the ship. Ethan stayed behind to ensure everyone made it back safely, narrowly avoiding being caught himself. Back aboard the Vanguard, the crew regrouped, shaken but alive. They had what they needed to continue, but the encounter served as a grim reminder of how precarious their situation was. Every step closer to Arcturus Prime felt like walking a tightrope with disaster waiting. On either side, despite the setbacks, Ethan refused to give up. He reminded the crew why they were doing this, not just for revenge or survival, but for hope. Hope that someday humanity could rise again. Hope that their sacrifices wouldn't be in vain. And so the Vanguard pressed onward, carrying the fragile flame of defiance into the darkness. The USS Vanguard continued its perilous journey deeper into enemy territory, inching closer to the heart of the Galvorian Empire. The crew had grown quieter over time, their initial bursts of determination giving way to a tense, weary focus. Every jump through hyperspace brought them closer to Arcturus Prime, but also closer to danger. They were running low on food, fuel, and patience. Yet no one complained, not openly, at least. Everyone understood that stopping now meant failure. And failure meant extinction. Ethan spent most of his time on the bridge, poring over star charts and coordinating with Olivia and Daniel to keep the ship operational. He rarely slept, his mind constantly racing with plans, contingencies, and worst-case scenarios. Lavra noticed how much weight he'd lost in recent weeks, how hollow his face had become. She tried to convince him to rest more, but Ethan always brushed her off. "We can sleep when this is over," he'd say, though deep down, they both knew there might not be an after. One evening, as the ship drifted quietly through a desolate sector of space, disaster struck without warning. Alarms blared throughout the vessel, red lights flashing across every corridor. On the bridge, Olivia shouted updates as fast as she could process them. "Captain, we've got a breach in navigation control." Someone tampered with the systems. Ethan's stomach dropped. Tampering? That meant only one thing: a traitor. Aboard the ship. His eyes scanned the room, searching for any sign of guilt among his crew. Before he could respond, Daniel burst onto the bridge, his face pale. "It's Marcus," Daniel said breathlessly. "He locked himself in navigation and disabled our course corrections. We're drifting straight toward a Galvorian patrol fleet." Marcus Klein was the communications officer, a quiet man who usually kept to himself. Ethan hadn't thought much about him before now. He wasn't exactly memorable, but betrayal from someone so unassuming felt like a punch to the gut. Without hesitation, Ethan ordered 2 security officers to accompany him to navigation, while Olivia worked to override Marcus's sabotage remotely. When they arrived outside the sealed door, Ethan took a deep breath and activated the comm system. "Marcus, open the door. You don't have to do this." For a moment, there was silence. Then Marcus's voice crackled through the speakers, shaky but firm. "I'm sorry, Captain. I can't let you destroy us all. If we surrender, maybe they'll show mercy." "Mercy?" Ethan snapped, anger boiling beneath his calm exterior. "You think the Galvorians will spare us because we roll over? They'll kill us all, Marcus. And then what? What happens to Earth, to humanity? I don't know." Marcus shouted back, his voice breaking. "But staying out here isn't working either. We're outnumbered, outgunned, we're already dead. At least this way, some of us might survive." Ethan clenched, his fists struggling to stay composed. He glanced at the security officers beside him, then turned back to the door. "Listen to me, Marcus. I understand you're scared. We're all scared, but giving up isn't the answer. Running away never solved anything. If we quit now, everything we've fought for, all the lives we've lost, it'll mean nothing." There was another long pause. Finally, Marcus spoke again, his tone softer this way. I wanted to live." "We all want to live," Ethan replied. "But sometimes living means fighting, even when the odds are against you." After a few agonizing seconds, the door hissed open. Marcus stood inside, his hands trembling as he held up a small datapad, the device he'd used to hack the navigation system. His face was streaked with tears, and he looked utterly defeated. Ethan stepped forward cautiously, taking the datapad from him. "You're under arrest," Ethan said simply, nodding to the security officers to escort Marcus away. Back on the bridge, Olivia managed to regain control of the ship just in time to avoid detection by the Galvorian patrol fleet. The narrow escape left everyone shaken, but the real damage had already been done. News of Marcus's betrayal spread quickly among the crew, sowing seeds of doubt and fear. People began questioning whether others might secretly share his views. Could they trust each other anymore? Rachel confronted Ethan later that night, her arms crossed and her expression fierce. "This changes everything," she said bluntly. If one of your own people can turn on you, how do we know it won't happen again? How do we know someone else isn't planning something? I can't guarantee anything, Ethan admitted. But I trust my crew. Most of them anyway. And if anyone else wants to bail, fine, let them go. The rest of us will finish this mission. Rachel didn't look satisfied, but she didn't argue further. Instead, she stormed off, leaving Ethan alone on the bridge once more. He stared at the stars outside the viewport, feeling the weight of leadership pressing down on him harder than ever. Betrayal was painful enough, but the mistrust it created was far worse. How could he lead a team divided against itself? Lovra found him hours later, still sitting in the same spot. She handed him a cup of tea, her substitute for coffee, since supplies were dwindling, and sat down beside him. For a while, neither of them spoke. Finally, Laura broke the silence. "You can't carry all of this by yourself, Ethan," she said gently. "No matter how strong you are, you're still human. Let us help you." Ethan sighed, rubbing his temples. "I don't know if I can fix this, Lovra. Marcus betrayed us. Rachel's losing faith. The crew is falling apart. What am I supposed to do?" "You remind them why we're here," Lovra replied firmly. "You remind them that we're not fighting for glory or revenge. We're fighting for hope, for the chance to build something better. Sometimes people need to hear that, especially when things feel hopeless." Her words stayed with Ethan long after she left. The next day, he called an emergency meeting in the briefing room. When the crew gathered, he stood at the front, looking at each person individually. Some avoided his gaze while others met it defiantly. He took a deep breath and began to speak. "I'm not going to lie to you," he started. "What happened with Marcus shook all of us. It made us question ourselves, question each other. Maybe some of you are wondering if this mission is worth it, if we're worth it." He paused, letting his words sink in. "But here's the truth. We may not win. Hell, we probably won't. The odds are stacked against us, and we all know it. But quitting isn't an option. Not now, not when billions of lives depend on us." Ethan's voice grew stronger, more passionate. "Every day we stay alive, every battle we fight, we prove to the Galvorians and to ourselves that they can't break us, that we're still standing, still fighting. Even if we fail, even if none of us make it out of this alive, we'll have given humanity a chance to rise again, a chance to rebuild. Isn't that worth fighting for?" The room fell silent. Slowly, heads began to nod. A few murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Rachel, standing near the back, finally stepped forward. "You're right," she said, her tone less confrontational than usual. "We can't give up now, not when we're so close." Others chimed in, voicing their support. Ethan felt a flicker of relief, though he knew this unity might not last forever. Still, for now it was enough. The crew returned to their duties, with renewed determination, working together to repair the damage caused by Marcus's sabotage. Daniel patched up the navigation systems, muttering curses under his breath as he worked. Olivia ran diagnostics on every subsystem, ensuring there were no lingering vulnerabilities. Even Rachel pitched in, helping wherever she could dot as the days passed. The atmosphere aboard the Vanguard shifted slightly. The tension remained, but it was tempered by a shared sense of purpose. Conversations became less guarded, smiles returned to faces, and the crew started functioning like a team again. Lavra noticed the change and smiled to herself, knowing Ethan's speech had made a difference, but the road ahead was still fraught with danger. The closer they got to Arcturus Prime, the more patrols they encountered. Each encounter tested their resolve, pushing them to their limits. Supplies dwindled further, forcing rationing measures that left everyone hungry and irritable. Yet despite the hardships, the crew pressed on, driven by the belief that their mission mattered. One night, as the ship drifted silently through the void, Ethan stood on the observation deck, gazing at the distant glow of Arcturus Prime. It was beautiful, almost serene, belying the horrors that awaited them there. Beside him, Larva joined him, holding 2 cups of tea. "We're really doing this, aren't we?" she asked softly. Ethan nodded. "Yeah, no turning back now." Larva smiled faintly. "Then let's make sure we're ready." Ethan looked at her, feeling a surge of gratitude. Whatever happened next, he knew he wouldn't face it alone. Together, they would see this through to the end, no matter the cost. The USS Vanguard finally reached the outskirts of Arcturus Prime, the capital world of the Galvorian Empire. It was a fortress planet, surrounded by layers of orbital defenses and swarms of warships that patrolled the skies like vultures circling prey. The crew stared at the sight on their screens, awestruck by the sheer scale of the Empire's stronghold. For a moment, it felt impossible to believe they could even get close, let alone strike a blow against it. Ethan stood on the bridge, his jaw tight as he studied the tactical display. "This is it," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. "No turning back now." Olivia, seated at her station, nodded grimly. "We'll need every trick we've got to pull this off." She tapped a few commands into her console, pulling up detailed scans of the planet's defenses. "Look at this: 3 rings of energy shields, automated turrets, and enough patrol ships to fill an ocean. If we try to go in guns blazing, we're dead before we even start." Daniel chimed in from where he was hunched over a panel, adjusting the ship's systems. "Then we don't go in guns blazing. We go in quiet, sneaky-like." Ethan turned to him. "You think you can rig something to mask our approach?" Daniel scratched his head, thinking hard. "Maybe. If we use those stolen Galvorian transponders Rachel brought aboard, we might be able to fake being one of their own ships, but it won't last forever. Once we're inside, we'll have to move fast." "Fast isn't going to be a problem," Ethan replied. "What about disabling the Aegis array? Do we know where it is yet?" Olivia pulled up another set of data. "It's located in the central spire of the Imperial Palace, the tallest structure on the planet. Heavily guarded, naturally. Getting close will be tricky." Rachel stepped forward, her fiery red hair catching the dim light of the bridge. "Leave that part to me," she said confidently. "My squadron can cause distractions while your ground team infiltrates the tower. Just tell me when and where to hit." Ethan hesitated. Sending Rachel's fighters into such a heavily defended area was risky, but he knew she was right. They would need diversions if they wanted any chance of success. "All right," he said finally. "But stick to the plan. No heroics." Rachel smirked. "Heroics are my specialty." With the strategy set, the crew sprang into action. Daniel worked tirelessly to modify the ship's systems, integrating the stolen transponders and tweaking the engines to mimic the signature of a Galvorian cruiser. Meanwhile, Olivia programmed new flight paths to avoid detection during their approach. Larva moved among the crew, offering encouragement and making sure everyone stayed focused despite the mounting tension. As the hours ticked by, the preparations grew more intense. Weapons were checked and rechecked, equipment tested, and escape routes mapped out in case things went wrong. Ethan gathered his infiltration team himself, Olivia, and 2 trusted crew members named Chris Harper and Mia Torres, and reviewed the plan one last time. "We only have one shot at this," Ethan reminded them. "Once we're inside, there's no room for error. Stick together, follow orders, and keep moving." "Got it?" Everyone nodded solemnly. They all understood the stakes. If they failed, not only would Earth be destroyed, but humanity's last. Hope would vanish along with them. Finally, the moment came. The Vanguard slipped into the planet's orbit under the guise of a damaged Galvorian supply vessel. The deception worked. The patrols ignored them, assuming they were just another routine arrival. As they descended through the atmosphere, the crew held their breath, waiting for the inevitable alarm that would signal discovery. But it never came. When the ship landed at a remote docking bay, Ethan's infiltration team disembarked quickly, blending into the shadows of the sprawling cityscape. Rachel's squadron launched simultaneously, drawing attention away from the ground operation by targeting key installations near the perimeter of the shield network. Explosions lit up the horizon, shaking the ground beneath their feet as the battle began. The infiltration team moved swiftly, sticking to alleys and abandoned buildings to avoid detection. Olivia led the way, using her scanner to guide them toward the central spire. Along the way, they encountered several groups of Galvorian soldiers, forcing them to fight or find alternate routes. Each skirmish left them more exposed, their movements slower and more cautious. At one point, Mia took a blaster shot to the leg, collapsing in pain. Chris helped her limp along, but it was clear she wouldn't be able to keep up much longer. Ethan made the call to leave her behind in a secure hiding spot, promising to come back for her once the mission was complete. It was a hard decision, but they couldn't afford to lose momentum. By the time they reached the base of the central spire, the sounds of Rachel's diversionary attacks echoed faintly in the distance. The entrance was guarded by a squad of elite Galvorian troops, their armor gleaming ominously in the dim light. Ethan signaled for silence, then gestured for Olivia to disable the security cameras. With precision honed by years of practice, she hacked into the system, creating a brief window of opportunity. "Go," Ethan whispered sharply. They rushed forward, taking out the guards in a flurry of suppressed gunfire. It wasn't clean, but it was effective. Within moments, the path was clear, and they slipped inside the towering structure. Inside, the spire was a maze of corridors and elevators, each level more heavily fortified than the last. The team relied on stealth and quick reflexes to navigate the labyrinth, avoiding patrols and disabling automated defenses as they ascended higher. Every step brought them closer to their goal, the control room housing the Aegis array. As they neared the top, however, disaster struck. An alarm blared suddenly, cutting through the silence like a knife. Red lights flashed overhead, and heavy footsteps echoed down the halls as reinforcements closed in. "They must have found Mia," Olivia muttered, her voice tinged with guilt. "There's nothing we can do about that now," Ethan snapped. "Keep moving." They sprinted the final stretch, reaching the control room just as the first wave of soldiers rounded the corner behind them. Ethan sealed the door with a manual override, buying them precious seconds. Inside, the massive machinery of the Aegis array hummed ominously, its power core glowing with an eerie blue light. "Disarm it," Ethan ordered, taking position by the door to hold off the attackers. Olivia and Chris worked frantically at the consoles, trying to bypass the complex security protocols locking down the system. Sweat dripped from their brows as the minutes dragged on, the sounds of pounding fists and blaster fire growing louder outside. "I'm in," Olivia shouted triumphantly, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "Initiating shutdown sequence." The Fendi machine groaned in protest, its lights flickering as the shutdown process began. But it wasn't fast enough. The door burst open, and Galvorian soldiers poured into the room, opening fire. Ethan and Chris returned fire, shielding Olivia as she completed the final steps. "Almost done," Olivia yelled, her voice strained. "Just a few more seconds." A blaster bolt grazed Ethan's shoulder, sending a searing pain through his body. He gritted his teeth and kept firing, refusing to fall back. Chris went down next, collapsing with a cry as a shot hit him square in the chest. Ethan dragged him behind cover, shouting for Olivia to hurry. "Got it!" she screamed, slamming her hand down on the console. The Aegis array shuddered violently, its glow fading as the power core shut down completely. The room fell silent except for the distant rumble of collapsing shields and the sound of Rachel's squadron continuing their assault outside. Ethan exhaled sharply, his body sagging with relief. They had done it. Against all odds, they had succeeded, but their victory was short-lived. Reinforcements flooded the hallway, pinning them down. With no way out and their bodies battered and bruised, Ethan realized they weren't going to make it off the planet alive. Still, he smiled bitterly. At least they had bought humanity a fighting chance, and sometimes that was enough. The control room of the central spire was a chaotic mess. Smoke curled from damaged consoles, and the air stung with the sharp smell of burnt circuits. Ethan leaned heavily against a shattered pillar, clutching his wounded shoulder as blood seeped through his fingers. His breathing was ragged, each inhale a struggle against the pain. Across the room, Olivia knelt beside Chris, pressing her hands firmly against his chest to stop the bleeding. Chris's face was pale, his eyes half closed, but he managed a weak smile. "We did it," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Didn't we?" Olivia nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Yeah, we did. You held on long enough." Ethan forced himself to stand, ignoring the throbbing in his shoulder. The sounds of enemy reinforcements echoed closer, their boots pounding against the metal floors outside. He glanced at the sealed door, which wouldn't hold much longer. Time was running out, not just for them, but for the rest of the crew waiting aboard the Vanguard. If they didn't act fast, the entire mission would be for nothing. "Lavra." Ethan set into his comlink, his voice hoarse but urgent. "Status." "Report. Are you clear?" There was a moment of static before Laura's voice crackled through. "We're ready to extract, but the patrols are swarming around your position. Rachel's squadron is holding them off, but they can't last forever. We need a distraction," Ethan replied. "Something big. Can the Vanguard punch a hole through their lines?" "We'll do what we can," Lavra answered. "But you'd better move quickly. Once the Galvorians realize the Aegis array is offline, they'll throw everything they've got at us." Ethan clenched his jaw. "Understood. Stand by." He turned back to Olivia and Chris, his expression grim. "We need to get out of here, now." Olivia shook her head, her voice breaking. "Chris can't walk. And even if he could, he won't. Make it far like this." Ethan hesitated, his mind racing. He knew what had to be done, but saying it aloud felt like tearing a piece of himself apart. "Then we leave him behind." "No." Olivia snapped, her eyes flashing with anger. "I'm not leaving him." "It's not up for debate," Ethan said firmly, though his voice softened. "Chris knows the stakes. He wouldn't want you to die trying to save him." Before she could argue further, Chris reached up weakly, grabbing her wrist. "Liv, listen to him. I'm done for anyway. But you still have a chance. Don't waste it." Tears streamed down Olivia's face as she stared at him, torn between loyalty and logic. Finally she nodded, choking back a sob. "I'll come back for you, I swear." "You'd better," Chris murmured, his lips curling into a faint smile. Before his eyes closed, Ethan helped Olivia to her feet, pulling her toward the emergency exit at the rear of the control room. Behind them, the door groaned under the weight of enemy fire. It wouldn't hold for more than a few seconds. As they slipped through the narrow passage, Ethan activated a remote detonator, planting charges along the walls to collapse the corridor and slow their pursuers. The escape route led them to a maintenance shaft that spiraled downward, away from the chaos above. The climb was treacherous, made worse by Ethan's injury and Olivia's exhaustion. Every step sent fresh waves of agony through Ethan's body, but he gritted his teeth and pushed forward. They couldn't afford to stop, not now. Meanwhile, aboard the Vanguard, Lavra coordinated with Daniel and the remaining crew to prepare for extraction. The ship hovered just outside the planet's atmosphere, dodging incoming fire from Galvorian cruisers. Rachel's squadron continued their relentless assault, drawing enemy forces away from the spire, but their numbers were dwindling. Ships exploded in fiery bursts, their pilots lost to the void. "We're running out of time." Daniel shouted over the din of alarms. "If we don't go soon, we'll be overwhelmed." Lavra gripped the edge of her console, her knuckles white. "Hold steady, we're not leaving without them." Back on the surface, Ethan and Olivia emerged from the maintenance shaft into a deserted plaza littered with debris. The distant rumble of explosions rattled the ground beneath their feet. Through the haze of smoke and dust, they spotted the faint outline of a shuttle, a small craft Rachel had left behind as part of the extraction plan. They sprinted toward it, dodging blaster fire from pursuing soldiers. As they reached the shuttle, Ethan froze. The pilot's seat was empty. Rachel wasn't there. She must have gone back to help, Olivia gasped, panic rising in her voice. Ethan cursed under his breath. Without hesitation, he climbed into the cockpit and powered up the engines. "Get in, we'll find her." "But," Olivia started to protest. "There's no but," Ethan interrupted. "We stick together. That's how we survive." With Olivia strapped in beside him, Ethan launched the shuttle skyward, weaving through the chaos of aerial combat. Below, Rachel's fighters engaged in dogfights with Galvorian ships, their maneuvers daring and precise. Ethan scanned the battlefield, searching for any sign of Rachel's distinctive red-trimmed fighter. Finally, he spotted it, a lone craft. Darting between enemy vessels, its shields flickering dangerously low. "Hold on," Ethan warned, pushing the throttle to maximum. The shuttle surged forward, narrowly avoiding collisions as it closed the distance. Over the comes Rachel's voice crackled through, strained but defiant. "About time you showed up," she quipped. "I was starting to think you forgot about me." "Not a chance," Ethan replied. "Fall back to my position. We're getting out of here." Rachel's fighter peeled away from the fight, following the shuttle as it raced toward the edge of the atmosphere. Behind them, Galvorian cruisers gave chase, unleashing volleys of missiles. One struck too close, sending the shuttle spinning wildly. Ethan fought to regain control, his hands gripping the controls tightly. "Daniel, we need cover fire." Laura's voice barked over the coms. "On it," Daniel responded. From above, the Vanguard descended like a vengeful specter, its cannons blazing. Enemy ships scattered as the warship carved a path through the blockade, clearing the way for the shuttle and Rachel's fighter to slip through. Finally, they reached the safety of the Vanguard's hangar bay. The shuttle touched down roughly, skidding to a halt as the magnetic clamps secured it in place. Ethan and Olivia stumbled out, greeted by Lavra and a team of medics who rushed to tend to their injuries. Rachel climbed out of her fighter moments. Later, her face streaked with soot but her spirit unbroken. "We made it," she said, exhaling deeply. "Against all odds, we actually made it, but the celebration was short-lived." As the crew regrouped aboard the ship, the reality of their losses began to sink in. Chris hadn't made it. Neither had many of Rachel's pilots, their names added to the growing list of those who had given everything for the cause. Silence fell over the hangar as everyone processed the cost of their victory. Ethan stood at the center of it all, his body battered but his resolve unshaken. He looked around at the faces of his crew, exhausted, wounded, but alive, and felt a surge of pride. They had faced impossible odds and somehow prevailed. The Aegis array was disabled, its threat neutralized. Earth was safe for now, yet Ethan knew the battle wasn't over. The Galvorian Empire would retaliate, throwing everything it had at humanity's last bastion of hope. But for the first time in years, Ethan believed they might actually stand a chance. Together, they had proven that even the smallest spark of defiance could ignite a flame bright enough to challenge the darkness. And sometimes, that was all it took to change the course of history. The USS Vanguard limped through the stars, its battered hull groaning with every jump through hyperspace. The ship was a shadow of its former self, held together by sheer willpower and Daniel's relentless tinkering. Inside, the mood was somber, but tinged with a fragile sense of hope. They had succeeded in disabling the Aegis array, but the cost had been devastating. Chris was gone, along with so many others who had given their lives for the mission. Yet, despite the losses, there was a quiet pride among the crew. They had struck a blow against the Galvorian Empire, one that would ripple across the galaxy. Ethan stood on the bridge, staring out at the endless void. His shoulder throbbed where the blaster bolt had grazed him, but it was nothing compared to the weight he felt pressing down on his chest. He thought about Chris, about the brave pilots who hadn't returned, and about Marcus, whose betrayal still lingered like a bitter aftertaste. For all their sacrifices, they were only halfway home. Earth awaited them, but so did uncertainty. Would humanity rise again? Or would this victory be just a fleeting moment before the Empire crushed them once and for all? Lavra approached quietly, her medical kit in hand. "You should let me check that wound," she said, gesturing to his shoulder. "It might get infected if you don't take care of it." Ethan nodded absently, allowing her to lead him to the med bay. As she cleaned and bandaged the injury, neither of them spoke. Words seemed unnecessary. They both knew what the other was thinking. This war wasn't over. Not yet. Back on the bridge, Olivia worked tirelessly at her station, analyzing data streams and plotting the safest course back to Earth. Her movements were mechanical, her mind elsewhere. She kept seeing Chris's face, hearing his final words. She had promised to come back for him, but deep down, she knew she never could. It haunted her, gnawing at the edges of her thoughts like a storm cloud refusing to break. Rachel sat nearby, her fiery demeanor subdued. She stared blankly at the tactical display, replaying the battle in her mind. So many good people lost. So much destruction. Was it worth it? She glanced at Ethan when he returned to the bridge, his presence steadying her frayed nerves. Maybe it was. Maybe someday, when the dust settled, someone would look back and see this moment as the turning point, the spark that ignited a revolution. Days turned into weeks as the Vanguard drifted closer to Earth. Along the way, they encountered remnants of other rebel groups, scattered ships and survivors clinging to life in the outer reaches of the galaxy. Some hailed them as heroes, while others viewed them with suspicion, unsure whether to trust the ragtag crew of a broken-down warship. Ethan welcomed those who wanted to join their cause, knowing strength lay in numbers. Each new face brought a glimmer of hope, a reminder that humanity was still alive. As they neared Earth, the crew prepared for the worst. The planet had been devastated during the Empire's initial assault, its cities reduced to rubble, and its people enslaved or scattered. What remained was anyone's guess. When they finally entered orbit, the sight below took their breath away. The surface was scarred, yes, but signs of life flickered faintly amidst the ruins. Small settlements dotted the landscape, clusters of survivors working together to rebuild what had been lost. Ethan ordered the ship to land near one of the largest encampments, a sprawling community nestled in the shadow of a crumbling skyscraper. As the Vanguard touched down, the crew disembarked cautiously, unsure of how they would be received. To their surprise, they were greeted not with hostility, but with cheers. Men, women, and children emerged from makeshift shelters, waving flags, stitched together from scraps of fabric. Their faces were gaunt, their bodies weary, but their spirits burned brightly. A woman stepped forward, her hair streaked with gray and her hands calloused from years of labor. "We heard rumors," she sighed, her voice trembling with emotion. "Rumors that someone had struck a blow against the Empire. We didn't dare believe it. Until now." Ethan exchanged a glance with Lavra, then addressed the crowd. "We've done what we can, but the fight isn't over. The Empire will retaliate. If we want to survive, we need to stand united." The woman nodded firmly. "Then count us in. Whatever you need, we'll do it." Word spread quickly, and soon other settlements joined the cause. Survivors banded together, pooling resources and sharing knowledge. Factories that had lain dormant for years roared back to life, producing weapons and supplies. Farmers tilled the scorched earth, coaxing crops from the ashes. Slowly but surely, humanity began to rebuild, not just physically, but emotionally. Hope, once extinguished, began to burn a new dot in the months that followed. Ethan became a symbol of resistance, not because he sought glory, but because he embodied perseverance. He led by example, working alongside the crew and the settlers to fortify Earth's defenses. Rachel organized training programs for new recruits, teaching them how to fly and fight. Olivia coordinated reconnaissance missions, mapping out potential threats. Daniel scavenged parts from abandoned ships, using them to repair and upgrade the Vanguard. And Lavra tended to the wounded, offering comfort to those who needed it most. But even as progress was made, the specter of the Galvorian Empire loomed large. Intelligence reports indicated that reinforcements were being mobilized, preparing for an all-out assault on Earth. Time was running out. Ethan called a meeting with his senior officers to discuss their options. "We can't win a direct confrontation," Olivia pointed out. "Their numbers are too great." "Agreed," Ethan replied. "Which means we need to hit them where it hurts, their supply lines. Without resources, their fleet will crumble." Rachel leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with determination. "Let me take a squadron. We'll cripple their logistics before they even reach us. And I'll coordinate sabotage operations within occupied territories," Olivia added. "Every little bit helps." Ethan nodded, grateful for their resolve. "Good, let's get to work." The plan was risky, but it paid off. Over the next several months, Rachel's raids disrupted the Empire's flow of materials, leaving their ships stranded and vulnerable. Meanwhile, covert operatives infiltrated enemy strongholds, sabotaging key infrastructure and sowing discord among the ranks. The Empire's grip on the galaxy began to weaken, cracks forming in its once unshakable foundation. When the final assault came, humanity was ready. The skies above Earth erupted in a blaze of fire and steel as the Galvorian fleet clashed with the ragtag coalition of rebels and settlers. It was chaos, brutal and unrelenting, but the defenders held their ground. Inspired by the courage of the Vanguard and its crew, ordinary men and women fought with extraordinary valor, standing shoulder to shoulder against impossible odds. In the end, it was the unity of humanity that won the day. The Galvorians, accustomed to crushing isolated pockets of resistance, found themselves overwhelmed by a united front. One by one, their ships fell, their commanders surrendering or retreating into the depths of space. By the time the last shot was fired, the Empire's dominance had been shattered. Ethan stood on the bridge of the Vanguard, watching as the surviving enemy vessels fled into the void. Exhaustion weighed heavily on him, but a faint smile played at the corners of his lips. They had done it. Against all odds, they had triumphed. Later that night, Ethan wandered to the observation deck. Finding Lavra already there, she handed him a cup of tea, their silent ritual unchanged despite everything they had been through. "What happens now?" she asked softly. Ethan gazed out at the stars, their light shimmering faintly through the viewport. "Now we rebuild. We honor those we lost by creating something better, something worth fighting for." Lavra smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I think Chris would be proud." Ethan nodded, his throat tightening. "Yeah, me too." As the galaxy began to heal, the legend of the USS Vanguard grew. It became more than just a ship. It was a symbol of resilience, proof that even in the darkest times, hope could prevail. Humanity had faced extinction and emerged stronger, united by a shared purpose and an unyielding determination to survive. And somewhere among the stars, perhaps Chris and the others looked down, smiling at what they had helped create.